And now I welcome the Chief Imam Syed Ali Abbas Razawi. He's representing the Scottish Ahlul Bayt Society.
Good afternoon. If I could just start by thanking the InterFaith Forum of Iceland, the Conference of European Churches, Council of Bishops Conference of Europe, Chief Rabbi Shuji wasn't able to make it, and our other guests and hosts and so forth who are here and have greeted us very well. Firstly, I'd like to start off by thanking Iceland for hosting us and at the same time for what's been so far a respectable discussion. I feel that we're friends, come together, and as you can see, it's a very important discussion to have. A wide cross-section of society is here from the Jewish communities, from the Muslim communities, from the Christian communities, and so forth. Quite a diverse cross-section of European society, I'd say. So therefore, I think it's important that it is done in a friendly manner, and the discussion must be informed. With that, I'd like to commend, as mentioned, that Iceland has a very good record of human rights. But naturally, not everything is black and white. There are areas of gray and there's areas of interpretation. And what we're dealing with today is interpretation. That on the one hand, you have rights for children, but on the other, you have the freedom of worship and belief. And I think that this is something which is very important because it has severe implications. As you've seen so far, there's been great passion around this. The ability to be able to practice, the ability to be able to worship, the ability to be able to raise your children in your faith. And that's something which has been taking place for thousands of years. So just like the Jewish community, the Muslim community also has circumcision. It's something that's been passed down from Abraham. On the one hand, Ishmael, on the one hand, Isaac, both of whom have been instructed to circumcise. So you've got a tradition which is going back thousands of years. In fact, it predates Islam. And from the advent of Islam, we find this as an Abrahamic tradition that we circumcise our children. Now, I think what's also important to bear in mind is that we cannot confuse this with female genital mutilation. And I think that's very important to put that to one side. That here we're looking at male circumcision. We are all united against female genital mutilation. But what's important is to look at what the context of this discussion is and not to conflate two different topics together. And that is in regards to male circumcision. I think the pretext has been so far that, or the primacy of the rights of children or what's good for a child. Sometimes it looks to me, and this discussion has looked to me, that a parent doesn't really know what's good for their children. And that's something that's been coming across from the first two speakers, the idea that we as parents may not know what's good for our children and grandchildren. You've heard from some of our guests, some of the speakers before, that their grandchildren, their children, and themselves, bearing in mind, in this room you have Muslims and Jews who actually circumcise as children. Psychological damage, well, I think some of our speakers have spoken very well. I didn't notice any psychological damage, which was there. In terms of the question regarding the medical data, I've looked at the medical data. Just last night I was speaking to the Office of the Undersecretary of State, the Undersecretary General of the United Nations. And there was an emphasis there that they are really keeping or monitoring this particular discussion. If it was so clear, they would have released something against it, but they're actually looking towards this discussion with eagerness to see if it's fair, if the discussion is an open discussion, if the discussion is an informed discussion. Based upon those statistics, you've looked at complications. In fact, the statistics say that 1.6% of procedure that's been carried out, there's been complications, and that too, as you've heard, is incompetency on the side of the medical practitioners. So I think when we are presenting data, especially when it comes to data in terms of the hindrances, we need to look at it correctly and not obscure the data. I think the other thing is that, yes, we've looked at it in terms of or the first speaker to talk about lower risks of HIV, and then HPV, UTI, all of which has been commissioned by the World Health Organization. So it's not something that's come from one body, but it's something which is looking multifaceted discussion that's taken place. Look, you've also heard best practice, and I think that Europe has put forward best practice. It's not something, Europe is not a monolith either, and Western countries or democratic countries are not monoliths. I think best practice needs to also to come forward. You've looked at the example of Germany. You've looked at examples of Sweden. In fact, you've looked at examples of the United Kingdom, Netherlands, Norway, the ability to practice your religion, but at the same time, we've looked at religion and circumcision in these countries. And I think that's something which is important. We must also take the example of the United States. It's a very big democracy. It needs to be taken into consideration. You've heard 58% to 60% of males are circumcised. And again, as my friend pointed out, the idea of culture comes into play. As you said, that there's a culture of circumcision, though there may not be culture here. But the fact of the matter is that whatever the culture is, we must understand the sensitivities of the discussion. And here the sensitivities of the discussion is religious sensitivities. It's paramount to both of the faiths. It's paramount to many of the Abrahamic faiths. The circumcision is something which is there, something which has been practiced for thousands of years. And to ban circumcision is tantamount to saying to those faiths which uphold circumcision that you're not welcome here. It's not something that you can evolve into. If you were to ban circumcision, those faiths wouldn't just evolve. Many of our rites, many of our rituals are based around that. For example, a Muslim, when he goes to Hajj, has to be circumcised. Hajj is a pillar. He has to go to Hajj, or he and she, Muslims have to go to Hajj. Male has to be circumcised, for example. There's certain things that a Muslim will not be able to do. So therefore, I think that we need to think on the religious implications as well. We're living in a democracy. We have differences. We have different people. Needs and wants needs to be taken into consideration. We can't just look at it from the basis of secularism only. And I think somebody rightly said that as you have religious fundamentalism, we are seeing a rise in Europe of secular fundamentalism. And as the European Commission has said time and time again, secular fundamentalism is actually outstripping religious fundamentalism. And this would come into that discussion. To polarize a group of people would lead to persecution of those people. If you're telling those people that, look, you are not allowed to practice, what happens? Are they able to live here comfortably? Are we living in a society that doesn't accept faith? The 20th century has seen many changes. We cannot reverse some of those changes that we saw in the 20th century. We're moving forward in the 21st century to a pluralism, and there doesn't seem to be pluralism if the right facts of the discussion are not put on the table. So look, I'm not here to criticize, I'm not here to condemn. What we're saying is let's have a healthy discussion. Let's talk about this. Let's make sure that we're sitting as friends to discuss all the different parameters of this discussion and let our decisions be informed. It's very important to have decisions made through being educated on the implications on one way or the other. Yes, on the one hand, we have the issue of medicine, but on the other hand, we also have freedom. And I don't think that they're colliding. We've looked at the statistics, we've had a discussion on the statistics, that actually it is a safe process. It's something that's being done. Complications are very limited. So my closing words are this. For God's sake, let's be fair. Let's not feed into either anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, bigotry. Let's be equal partners in this discussion so that we can move forward together, united and not divided. Thank you very much.